Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. Well, hey, look at that! Our virtual live studio audience, as always, the supportive, loving, caring people of Mishnah Mastery. Wonderful to have you all on board. Lovely to see everybody who's tuning in on YouTube as well. We're going to be doing chapter 10 and please God, chapter 11 tonight of Masechet Zevachim, continuing in the world of sacrifices. So let's get it up for you guys on the screen over here. And we'll get underway. So we are going to be talking about the priorities of the different processes and which sacrifices should be done first. Which ones get priority when you have multiple options. And the rule in Mishnah Aleph is going to be that whatever you would do more frequently gets priority. Now, I have no idea if the recording has captured anything on YouTube. So we're just going to start that again, if that's okay. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. But let me just check that I am doing that. Yeah, okay, let's start again. Big flourish, guys. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. Wonderful to have you all on board tonight. Oh, there's the virtual live studio audience again. We are going to be doing chapter 10 and chapter 11 of Masechet Zevachim, and we are going to be starting with Mishnah Aleph of chapter 10 of Perek Yud, where we're talking about which sacrifices are given priority. If you have multiple options in front of you, which one do you process first? And the rule, as we're going to see in Mishnah Aleph, is whatever you would do more frequently should come first. Are we all ready, guys? Here we go. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Aleph, Kol hatadir mechaveiro. Anything which you do more frequently than another sacrifice, that is going to be processed first. So that one comes first. Kol hatadir mechaveiro kodemes chaveiro. Whichever one you do more frequently comes first. For example, hatmidim kodmin lamusafim. A korban tamid, which is brought every single day, would be done before the korban musaf, which is brought every single... You're muted, Philip. You're muted again.
Shabbat.
Every single Shabbat, or every single Yom Tov, or every single Rosh Chodesh. But the point is, that is more infrequent than every single day. So the Tamid comes first. Musfei Shabbos, the Musaf of Shabbos, Kodmin le Musfei Rosh Chodesh would come before the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, because there are 4 Shabbats or 5 Shabbats in every month. And yeah, you know what I mean. You have more Shabbats in a month than you have one month, one Rosh Chodesh. Anyway, Musfei Rosh Chodesh, Kodmin le Musfei Rosh Hashanah. And there are more months in the year than there are Rosh Hashanahs. So you would bring the Korban Musaf for Rosh Chodesh ahead of the Musaf for Rosh Hashanah. Shneimar, as it says, quoting the Pasuk in Bamidbar, chapter 28, verse 23, Milvad olas haboker asher olas hatamid tasu eseile kaele. Yeah, that's the laning from Pesach. Besides the burnt offering of the morning, which is for a daily burnt offering, you shall offer these, indicating to us that the Korban Tamid is the one that you would prioritize, the one that you would associate as having to bring, and it's the novelty of the other sacrifices which indicates to us that you would always prioritize the more frequent. Mishnah base. Things which are more sanctified are going to come first, are going to be prioritized. And there's going to be 3 processes that would make a korban more sanctified. Number 1 is the number of blood applications on the mizbeach. The more applications, the higher the sanctity. Number 2, which parts are burnt on the mizbeach. The more parts that are burnt, like an olah, for example, which is wholly burnt with a W, not holy. It's holy as well. But that will be a higher level than other korbanos. And then the third factor is by whom and where is the korban eaten. So let's have a look. Anything that is more sacred is going to be prioritized. Dam chatas kodem ledam ola. The blood of the chatas would be processed before the blood of the Ola. Why? Because there are more applications for the bloods of the Chatas than there are for an Ola. Mipnei shehu meratzeh, because, as the Mishnah tells us, it affects. My mistake. That's not the reason why. Mipnei shehu meratzeh. The reason why the blood of Chatat comes before the blood of Ola is because you are able to atone through a Chatat for a sin which could incur a chiyuv kares, the penalty, the punishment of spiritual excision. So that takes priority over an olah, which doesn't have that atoning component to it. Evrei olah kodmin le'imurei chatas. The limbs of the olah come before the fats of the chatas. And that's because you are burning more of the korban olah than you are of the chatas. Look at that. That's exactly what I said. Because it is wholly burnt in the fire. Chatas kodemes la'asham. If you have the choice of a korban chatas to process or the korban asham, a shame guilt offering, the chatas comes first. Because the korban chatas has more applications of blood. It has 4 applications of blood, whereas the asham only has 2. Asham kodem latoda el nazir. The asham comes before the thanksgiving offering and the ram of the nazir. Mipnei shehu kodshe kodshim, because asham is still in the category of kodshe kodshim, the higher level sanctity. Hatoda ve'el nazir, the thanksgiving offering and the ram of the nazir, kodmin l'shlamim. They come before the korban shlamim. Mipnei shein echalin liyom echad utzu'unim lechem, because they get eaten for one day. The time frame for eating it is only one day and one night. And there are loaves of bread that get accompanied. There are 20 loaves of bread that accompany the Nazir offering, and there are 40 that accompany the Thanksgiving offering. But the Korban Shlamim is eaten over 2 days and one night. So the restrictions for the Korban, for the Asham and the El Nazir, the Todah and the El Nazir, means that it takes priority over the Shlamim. And then Shlamim Kodmin LaBechor, the Korban Shlamim, the peace offering, comes before the Bechor if you have a firstborn offering. Why? Mipnei Shehein Te'unin, am I in the right place? Yeah. Mipnei Shehein Te'unin Matan Arba Usmicha Unusachim Utnufas Chazev V'Shok. Because the Korban Shlamim requires multiple applications of the blood, right? 2 applications, but they go on all 4 corners because they go on the diagonals, right? Not only that, but it requires smicha. It needs to be rested on by the person's body before sacrificing, unasachim, and it has libations that go with it, utnufas chazev v'shok. And there's a process by which the breast and the thigh have to be waved in all different directions by the kohen and the owner. But none of these processes are required for the korban, bechor, for the bechor. Now, you may be wondering something, but it's not relevant yet. I saw it somewhere else. Okay, Mishnah Gimel, ladies and gentlemen. Says the Mishnah, Habachor kodem l'maaseh. The firstborn offering would be prioritized ahead of the tithed animal offering. Mipnei shekdushaso merechem v'nechal kohanim. Because the sanctity of the firstborn animal exists from the time of its birth. It's not designated. It's automatically infused with sanctity on account of the fact that it's the first animal to be born from that particular womb. Now, the Bechor gets eaten by, is that what I want to say? And not only that, but the Bechor is eaten by Kohanim only, whereas the tithed animal offering is eaten by anyone. Hamaser Kodin La'orphos. The tithed animal offering is brought before birds. Why? Mipnei shehu zevach v'yesh bo kodshe kodshim dama v'emurav. Because it's the maaser animal is at least a slaughterable sacrifice. whereas birds, you don't do shchita to it, you do malika, you snip it with the nail of the finger. So that's why the animal will take priority. V'yesh bo kodshe kodshim damo ve'emurav. And not only that, but it's kodshe kodshim. Oh, there are two elements of this sacrifice of the maaser, which are kodshe kodshim, high level, and that is damo ve'emurav. It's blood and its limbs, which get burnt on the altar. Whereas the birds, only the blood makes it to the altar, but not the actual animal itself. Mishnah Daled, ha'ofos kodmin lemenachos. Birds are going to take priority over menachos, which are the flour meal offerings. Because at least birds are under the category of blood species, meaning that they do have blood components to them. Minchas chote, the poor man's korban chatas, if a person needing to bring a korban chatat did not have enough money, so they could bring the minchas chote, which is a cheaper version. So that would take priority, kodemes leminchas nedava, to a voluntary mincha offering, a voluntary meal offering. Mipnei ba'a al chet, because at least with the minchas chote, it is coming on account of a sin. The person needs atonement, and so is bringing this minchas chote. Chatas ha'of kodemes le'olas ha'of. The chatas bird comes before the olas bird. And the reason for that is because, why is that, guys? The sin offering takes precedence because there's a pasuk that tells us that chatas always comes first. Not as exciting as I thought it was going to be. V'chein behekdesha, and evening, Dan. And similarly, behekdesha, when it comes to its consecration. What does that mean? When someone had to bring two korbanot, one was going to be an olah and one was going to be a chatas, and he's bringing them as a pair, so he would announce the chatas first before announcing the olah. That takes priority as well. Mishnah, hey, ladies and gentlemen, kol hachataos shebatorah, all guilt offerings, sin offerings in the Torah, kodmos la'ashamos, they should be prioritized. They should come before ashamos, any sin offerings. Chutz me'asham mitzora, with the exception of the shame offering of the mitzora. The person who is recovering from sara'as, the mitzora, he has to bring a chatas and he has to bring an asham, but he brings the asham first. And the reason for that is there's a dual purpose, because it starts to make him ready to be purified. So the asham comes first. Mipnei shehu ba al yedei hechsher, because the asham offering is coming to, as it were, effect his purification process. Kol ha'ashamos shebatorah, all of the guilt offerings in the Torah, vayin b'nei shtayim uvayin b'chesef shekalim, they should be brought with animals, with rams that are at least 2 years old, uvayin b'chesef shekalim, and they have to be worth at least 2 silver coins. Chutz me'asham nazir, with the exception of the nazir's shame offering, and this is a nazir who became tameh during his period of nazirus, and so he now has to bring a korban asham before resetting his count. So that asham of the nazir, va'asham mitzora, and also the asham of the mitzora, shehein ba'in b'nei shnasan, those animals should be 1 year old or in their first year, and va'enon ba'in b'chesef shekalim, and they don't need to be worth 2 silver coins, 2 silver shekalim, to be able to be brought. Moving on to Mishnah Vav. Kashem shehe kodmin b'hakravasan, in the same way that they would be prioritized for processing their sacrifices, kachen kodmin b'achilasan, so too they should be prioritized with regards to their consumption, with regards to when the deadline for eating them is going to be. Shlamim shel emesh, if you have a shlamim which was brought in the Beis Hamikdash already yesterday, ushlamim shelayom, and you've got a shlamim which has been processed that very day, shel emesh kodmin, then the one from yesterday should be eaten first, because that one has the more imminent deadline. Shlamim shel emesh, if you have a shlamim from the previous day, v'chatas v'asham shelayom, and you have a sin offering and a guilt offering from that day, shlamim shel emesh kodmin divrei Rabbi Meir. Then Rabbi Meir is going to say that the shlamim which had already started the previous day, that one should come first. However, say the chachamim orin hachatas kodemis, the sin offering comes first. Nipnei shehi kodshe kodshim. Even though the deadline might be the same, and you had a korban which was processed earlier, the chachamim say that you would eat the higher level sanctity korban first, which is the chatas in this instance. Moving on to Mishnah Zayin. Says the Mishnah, Uvachulam, and with regards to all of this, HaKohanim Rashayin Lishanos Ba'achilasam, the Kohanim are allowed to alter the way in which they eat them, and they can eat them La'achlan Sluyim, they can eat them roasted, Shlukim, boiled, Muvushalim, cooked, Velaseis Lasochan Tivle Chulin, Vesivle Truma Divrei Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Shimon says they can be seasoned with spices of chulin, which have not been sanctified, and even spices of truma, which can only be eaten by kohanim. Says Rabbi Meir, though, Lo yitain latochan tivlei truma. You shouldn't use spices of truma, even though you're a kohen. You shouldn't use spices of truma. Shelo yavi esa truma lidei psul, because you could end up putting those spices of truma into a disqualified status. How so? Spices that are truma, they have to be eaten by kohanim, but there's no deadline to eat them. There's no expiration date. But if you start seasoning your korban with spices of truma, now all of a sudden you've put a deadline on these spices. And so for that reason, Rabbi Meir would say you shouldn't season your sacrifice with spices of truma, because you're putting an expiration date on it, which didn't need to be done beforehand. Going on to Mishnah Ches, we're going to see that certain oils were burnt entirely, and some were given to Kohanim. Now, oil was used mainly for a korban mincha, for a flour meal offering, and for libation offerings, and also for a metzora. So the Mishnah is going to say as follows: Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, Imra isa shemen shahu mischalek ba'azara. If you see oil that is being distributed in the temple because the Kohanim are going to consume these samples of oil, says the Mishnah, Eina tatzarich lishol mahu. You don't need to ask what it is. Ella mosar rekike minchos Yisrael. If you see oil being distributed in the Beis Hamikdash, you can be assured that it is going to be oil which is left over from the meal offerings, from the wafers of the meal offerings. So if there was left over oil from these wafers, then it would be given to Kohanim. And if it wasn't from that, then v'log shemen shomet sora, then it would be from the measurement of oil, the log of which is a type of volume. It's the volume of oil of a log, shomet sora, which also would be given to to Kohanim. So if you remember from your parsha last week, we read Tazria Metzora. So there would be sprinklings of oil, and it would be applied to the earlobe, to the toe, the thumb, etc. So it's a process, and the leftovers would be given to Kohanim. So if you see this oil being distributed in the Beis Hamikdash, you know it's from one of those. Imra isa shemen shehu nasan al gabe ha'ishim. If you see oil which is being put onto the mizbeach, eina tatzarich lishol mahu. You don't need to ask where it's from. Ela mosar rekike minchos kohanim. Rather, you can be sure that it is coming from the minchos kohanim, the meal offering of the kohanim, minchas kohen Mashiach, or of the anointed priest, which had oil which would be burnt onto the altar. She'ein misnadvin shamen, because we do not contribute oil to the Mizbeach as a voluntary offering. So if you see it, you know that it's had its place. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Misnadbim Shamim. However, Rabbi Tarfon says you could be taking a fistful of oil and burning that on the Mizbeach as a gift offering. And so I guess he would disagree with the last part of that Mishnah. But fundamentally, if you saw it, you would know where it was coming from. Mazel tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing chapter 10, Perek Yud. And with that, we dive straight in to Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11. And we're going to be dealing with unique halachot of the Korban Chatat, of the sin offering. Says the Mishnah Aleph, we're going to be talking about the following. If blood from an animal, from a sacrifice, was to get spilt onto the uniform of the Kohen, then the clothing is going to require washing. It has to be washed in the Azara. But we're going to deal with over here which kind of begadim, which kind of clothing requires washing, and which kind of blood, which type of blood would need to mean that the clothing needs to be washed. So we're dealing here with the Korban Chatas. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Aleph, Dam Chatas shenitaz ala beged. If you have blood of a sin offering that gets splattered onto a person's clothing, it's going to require washing. It's going to require laundering. Even though the verse itself speaks only about the Korban Chatas with regards to the fact that it gets eaten, that it says that it has to be eaten in the sanctified place, inside the Beis HaMikdash, nonetheless, we apply this also to blood as well. Echad ha'ne'echeles ve'echad ha'pnimis te'unos kibbutz. Whether it is a sin offering that is eaten, or whether it's a sin offering that gets processed on the inner mizbeach, they are going to require washing if the blood gets sprinkled onto the clothing. So even though the verse was only talking about a chatas that gets eaten, it's going to apply also to the chatas that would get processed on the inner mizbeach. Shneimar taras hachatas, because the verse says this is the law of the sin offering, from which we learn Torah achas l'chol hachataos, which means that there's one Torah for all types of sin offerings. There's one law, which means that if blood gets sprinkled on the clothing, it needs to be washed. Says the Mishnah base, chatas psula. What if it is a disqualified korban chatas and the blood gets splattered onto the clothing? Okay, so if it's puzzle, so now you can't do the sprinkling of the blood on the mizbeach. So the Mishnah says if it's disqualified, ein damata on kibbutz, then the clothing does not need to be washed. Bein shahaya la shas hakosher, bein shelo haya la shas hakosher. And that is the case whether it was viable at one point or whether it wasn't. Meaning that if it got invalidated before the shechita, it definitely can't be washed. But even if you had done shechita properly, and then it got disqualified after that, even so, the Mishnah says you would not need to wash these garments if the blood was to be splattered on them. Ezohi shahaya la shasa kosher. What is considered a korban chatas that had a period of fitness applied to it, that at one point it was okay? Shelana v'shenitma'a v'sheyatsa'a. This would include a korban which has been left overnight. So when it was slaughtered, it was valid. V'shenitma'a, or it became impure after the slaughtering, but before the sprinkling. V'sheyatsa'a, or if it had been taken out of the confines of the Beis HaMikdash. Ve'ezohi shelo haya la shas hakosher. What would be considered a sacrifice that didn't have a period of fitness? Shenishchata chutz lizmana v'chutz limkoma. At the time of slaughtering, you had the wrong mindset, either for the wrong time or for the wrong place. And v'shekiblu pasulim zarku es dama, or where the Kabbalah was done, the collection of the blood was done by people who were disqualified from performing that particular part of the service, and then they went and sprinkled the blood. That's an example of a korban that never had the valid time frame applied to it. Mishnah Gimel, what we're going to see over here is that only blood which could have been sprinkled on the Mizbeach is going to require washing if blood was to get onto those clothes. So the Mishnah says, "Nitaz minat savar ala beged." If blood from the neck, from the life blood of the animal, which had never been received in a vessel, in a kli sharis, in a sanctified vessel. So if the blood squirted straight out from the neck onto the person's clothing, eino to'um kibbutz, it's not going to require washing, because that blood that sprinkled on it was never fit to be sprinkled on the mizbeach, because it never made its way into a temple vessel. Min hakeren u min hayesod, if blood sprinkled or splattered on the clothing after it had been sprinkled onto the corner of the mizbeach or onto the foundation of the mizbeach, einoton kibbutz, that also isn't going to warrant the clothing being washed, because you've already done the zrika with it. Nishpach al haritzpah va'asafo, if it got poured on the floor and then you gathered it up, then so if it is spilt out from the animal, not from a kli sharis, and then it had been scooped up, and then that had splattered onto the clothing, einot to'um kibbutz, it's not going to require washing. If it had come from the kli sharis, then you would need to wash. Says the Mishnah, einot to'um kibbutz ela hadam shniskabel b'chli. The only blood that's going to require laundering is blood that had been received into or collected into a kli, into a vessel from the neck of the animal, v'ra'ui lahazaya, and it is fit to be sprinkled on the mizbeach. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to wash it. Nitaz ala or ad shelo hushat, if blood splattered onto the hide, the skin of the animal before it was flayed, before it was stripped, eino to'um kibbutz, then it would not need to be laundered. So even though this skin would eventually turn into potentially a garment or into a piece of material, it doesn't need to be washed. Misha Hushat, but once it has been stripped, and so now already can be turned into a garment, or it could be turned into a piece of material, Ta'un kibbutz, then it does require kibbutz, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Eliezer says, Af misha hushat eino ta'un kibbutz. Even after it's stripped, after it's flayed from the body of the animal, it doesn't require laundry. And the reason for that is it would need to be classified and designated as being used for a garment or for a piece of material. If it doesn't have a shame beged on it, if it doesn't have the name beged designated to it, then Rabbi Eliezer would say it does not require kibbutz, laundry. Eino ta'un kibbutz ela makom hadam. The only part of the beged that requires washing is the area where the blood had splattered. V'davar shehu ra'ui lekabel tuma v'ra'ui lechibus. Says the Mishnah to finish off there, only if it was an item that could become tameh, if it was the required size to transmit tuma, v'ra'ui lechibus, and only if it was fit to be washed, which would exclude things like wooden kalim. So those wouldn't need to be washed if the blood had splattered. But if it was a beged, then the Mishnah is telling us that it would need to be washed if blood was to be sprinkled onto it. Just one moment. I feel like we haven't adequately explained why the blood warrants needing to be washed. Have I missed that? We've just kind of been presupposing that these garments need to be washed, but haven't really talked much about why. Earth? Anyone out there? No idea? All right, answers on a postcard.
We mentioned earlier that for a khatas, there's certain times in which you do have to clean the blood.
Yes, but why? What's going on when this blood sprinkles onto the garment? Why are we going into this so much that we have to wash the garment? Is it contaminating it?
She's not saying. It must be.
All right, well, answers on a postcard. Mishnah Dalet, guys. Mishnah Dalet. Where are we? We're down here. So we're still talking about blood on garments and washing them. And we're going to see that there are a couple of other halachot about a khatas. So all of what we've been talking about, the blood on the garments, was unique to a khatas. And we're going to see a couple of other halachot which are unique to a khatat as well. So let's see if we can make our way through this one. Echad habeged, ve'echad hasak, ve'echad ha'or. Whether it is material that is made out of cloth, or it's made out of sackcloth, or it's made out of leather, tu'unin kibus b'makom kadosh. They are going to require laundering in the azara, in the temple courtyard. Ushviras klicheres b'makom kadosh. Not only that, but breaking of an earthenware vessel. What's this referring to? If you cook a sin offering in a klicheres, in an earthenware vessel, then that has to be broken afterwards in the azara as well. So klicheres, shviras klicheres b'makom kadosh. If you cook a chatas in an earthenware vessel, that has to be smashed in the Beis Hamikdash as well. So I'm guessing it's conveying some kind of tumah, and I've obviously just missed that memo somewhere. Umarika ushtifa b'chli nechoshes. And if you cook a chatas in a copper vessel, in a metal vessel, then it's going to require marika, which is rinsing the inside with hot water, ushtifa, and rinsing the outside with cold water. B'makom kadosh, again, that has to be done in the azara, inside the courtyard. So zeh chome b'chatas mikodshei kashim, and that then are the areas of stringency that apply to a chatas that don't apply to other kodshei kodshim. So the requirement to wash the begadim, the clothes that get splattered with blood, the requirement to break an earthenware vessel in the azara if it was used to cook the chatas, and to rinse out the kli nechoshes, a metal vessel in the azara, if you cooked the chatas in that. So, hello. What's going on there? What's happened to my internet? Can you guys still see me? You can still hear me?
Yeah, we're still online.
Okay. That's awkward. What's going on? Maybe the battery's died. Oh, that is annoying. Okay, well, apologies to anyone watching on YouTube. Okay, you can still hear me though, so we carry on. Yeah, so the processes may apply to other korbanot, but the requirement to do it in the courtyard is unique to a chatas. So there's obviously a piece that I'm missing over here. But we move on with Mishnah Hey. Moving on to Mishnah Hey. Beged shiyatza chutz laklaim. If you have a beged, a garment, which has got this blood that has splattered onto it, and it went shiyatza chutz laklaim, it went outside of the temple courtyard, nichlas mechamsa b'makom kadosh. It has to be brought back in, and it has to be washed inside the confines of the Beis Hamikdash. Nitma chutz laklaim, if that beged became contaminated with tumah while it was outside of the azara, then you can't bring it back in because it's now tameh. So this washing can't be an issue of tumah. What am I missing? Korah. So instead you have to tear it. You have to rip it up. And once it is ripped up, it won't have a shame tumah on it. It won't have the classification of being tameh because it's not meeting the required size to be considered tumah, to be considered tameh. So then, v'nichnas mechavso b'makom kadosh. So it can be brought back in and it can be washed as a torn garment inside the confines of the Beis Hamikdash. Kli cheres sheyatza chutz l'klayim. If you've got this earthenware vessel that's been taken out of the azara, nichnas v'shavra b'makom kadosh, and you can bring it back in and you can smash it inside the temple confines still. If it becomes contaminated while it's outside of the confines of the Beis Hamikdash, then nokva. Then you have to pierce a hole in it, and if you pierce a hole in it, it will no longer be considered tameh. And then v'nichnas v'shavra b'makom kadosh, and then you can bring it back in, and you can smash it inside the confines of the Beis Hamikdash. Mishnah Vav. If you have a metal vessel, so the blood had been splattered on it. It got taken out of the azara. Then you can bring it back in, and you can rinse it on the outside with hot water, rinse it on the inside with cool water. Did I get that the right way around? The inside with hot water, the outside with cool water. B'makom kadosh, inside the temple. If it became contaminated while it was outside, then pochasol, and you have to diminish it, you have to reduce it in some way and damage it so that it doesn't have a status of impurity anymore. V'nichnas umorko v'shotfo b'makom kadosh, and then you can bring it back in and you can perform the rinsing process inside the confines of the Beis Hamikdash. Mishnah Zayin. Echad shebishel bo, whether you cooked inside a metal vessel, the meat of a korban, ve'echad she'era letocho roteach, whether you just poured boiling meat into the pot, into the vessel, echad kodshe kodshim, whether it is a higher level sacrifice, ve'echad kodshim kalim, or whether it's a lower level sacrifice, te'unim marika ushtifa, it's going to require this process of rinsing on the outside and on the inside that's going to be required. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kodshim kalim einon tu'unim marika shtifa. The lower level sacrifices does not require this kashering process to take place. Rabbi Tarfon, so rather Rabbi Shimon, it seems, would say, this isn't mentioned in the Mishnah, that he would say that it only has to be washed out to the area where the vessel had actually been used, so to the particular, I guess, water line or whatever you want to call it, or residue line maybe. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, im bishal bo mitchilas haregel, if it was cooked, if it was used for cooking the korban from the beginning of a Yom Tov, from the beginning of a Chag, then Yevashal Bois Kol HaRegel, it can be used for the entire Chag. It doesn't have to be cleaned out and kashered after every use. The Chachamim say, Ad Zman Achila Marika Ushtifa. The rabbis say, you have to kasher it, you have to do this rinsing on the outside and the inside before the end of the designated time period for any particular korban. So if you've got one day and a night, then you've got till the end of that day to be able to do it. And similarly, if it was a longer time frame. Either way, the Chachamim are saying that you can't just use it for the whole Chag. You have until the end of that deadline to be able to clean it out. Marika kimrika sakos. This process of marika is similar to the process of marika that is done for cups. So when there's wine that is stuck to the cup, so then you have to use this process of marika. And ushtifa keshtifa sakos. And the process of shtifa is like when you rinse the cup of cold water. Marika b'chamim ushtifa b'tzoinen. Marika is done with hot water, and shtifa is done with cold water. V'hashafud v'ha'askala magilan b'chamin. And if you have a skewer, a spit, or you've got a metal grill, then these require, for kushering, these require these require pouring boiling hot water over them to be able to kasher them. And finally, the last Mishnah for tonight, ladies and gentlemen, Mishnah Ches, final Mishnah of Perek Yud Aleph of chapter 11. Bishel bo kodshim v'chulin. If you have cooked in a metal vessel sacrificial meat and chulin, or kodshe kodshim v'kodshe kolim, or high-level sacrifices and lower-level sacrifices, im yesh bahen b'nosein tam, if there is enough of this meat to impart flavor, if it reaches that threshold, hare hakalim echalim kachamurim. So then the kashrus status, as it were, of the vessel has to be considered and treated as the most stringent ingredient. So that means then that it has to be treated as if it's had kodshe kodshim, for example, the higher level sanctity cooked inside of it, not the lower level. Ve'enan tu'unin marika ushtifa. If they do not impart this flavor, then they do not require the rinsing from the inside and the outside. Ve'enan poslim b'maga, and they are not going to disqualify other pieces of meat through contact. Rakik shanaga barakik. If you have a wafer which is unfit for use, and that touches another wafer, v'chaticha, or a piece of meat that touched another piece of meat, and one of them was unfit, lo kol harakikin, v'lo kol hachatichos asurim. It's not going to forbid all of the other pieces of meat. So if they touch one another, only the parts that touch are going to be problematic. Eino asur ela makom shebala. So if these pieces do touch, the only parts that are going to be forbidden are going to be the areas that actually came into direct physical contact, and that can be cut off, and then the rest of it could still be used and could still be consumed. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 11 of Maseches Zevachim. And to all those watching, we wish you a wonderful and meaningful week. Sorry again for the camera cutting out at the end, but let's face it, no one's watching this anyway. But in the meantime, we wish you a wonderful and meaningful week.